So, like I said, the topic today is going to be how to stop our anxious thoughts, which is it's a personal topic to me, because it's how I got into meditation. I got into meditation to help with really bad anxiety. It's not an uncommon thing for and not uncommon entry point for people in meditation. But the cool thing is, like, we all have anxiety. We all have worries. We're all worried about the future. And so while sometimes anxiety seems super unique to us, we're actually kind of all in a very similar boat. So I really enjoyed teaching this topic because I think people really identify with it. It's something we all go through pretty regularly. So hopefully you'll have some good takeaways here. Anxiety in general is I like to define it as it's an exaggeration of a future outcome, right? A social event that we think is going to go wrong, a feeling we think will never go away, like a disease coming back or something like that. All these are fears, all right, worries that exist in the future, and we sort of like exaggerate on them in our own mind to build them up and make them really, really potent and powerful, to the point that they're problematic to us. But the cool thing about the fact that they're kind of like future worries is the future hasn't happened yet. So our mind is sort of bringing them into our present moment. And that's actually great news because we can work with that. There's some flexibility. It hasn't happened yet, right? So today we're going to look at we're going to look at the kind of like the process that our mind goes through from okay to anxious. And the reason we're doing that is normally we just kind of think, okay, I'm anxious now, right? But there's some mental processes that are happening that lead up to that point. If we can kind of identify some of them, it helps us detect them early, which is a huge way we're going to combat our anxious thoughts, early detection, so to speak. All right. So that's a little setup of what we're going to talk about today. And then for anyone that's new, we'll talk a little bit about meditation in general. We'll do a breathing meditation. I'll try to go through this pretty quickly. That way we have time for everything. So if this is your first time meditating, meditation, we kind of think of it as like, I'm just going to leave the world behind and relax for a little while. And relaxation is something that comes along with meditation, but the true purpose of meditation is to become familiar with something. It's a learning tool. It's a way of investigating our own mind and learning about how we feel, right? So I think that's kind of something that we don't always get when we start to learn about meditation. We start to think of it as just like taking Advil, so to speak, right? And like you're just gonna chill out for a little bit, but it's actually more of like a remedy for a lot of our problems through kind of intentional investigation. But we do have to relax, which is, if you came here to relax, then great, you're going to. But the reason is that we normally are not very relaxed. Normally our mind is very busy. And when our mind is busy, it doesn't really do a great job of learning. It doesn't really do a great job of investigating things. Sort of like if you had a glass of water, right? And it's nice and clear. You can see the clear water. If I was like, hey, what are the colors behind the water? You could probably let me know like what the colors are behind the water. You can look through them. It's very clear, right? But if I add some dirt into the water and mix it up like that, well, now you can't see anything through. You can't see through the water at all. You can't see any colors through it. It's no longer clear, right? So we'll say the water is not clear, but the water is always clear. Right? The water hasn't changed. It's just that there's been some dirt in there. And if we let the dirt settle, the water will become clear again. And this is kind of analogous to how our mind is. Our mind is normally very clear, very peaceful, very calm, thoughtful, like objective thinking, reasonable, right? And it's just the bombardment of thoughts that are going on throughout the day, like constantly, that we're might not even be aware of, that are kind of adding dirt into the like water of our mind, so to speak. And so we just got to settle it, right? And we do that with breathing meditation. We're going to settle our mind with a technique called single-pointed concentration. Very fancy sounding. It just means focusing on one thing. And the thing we're going to focus on is our breath. we're going to focus so much on our breath, so exclusively on our breath, that some of these other thoughts, the kind of like murkiness of that's in our glass of water, they're going to settle, right? They're going to fade to the back, and we're going to start to relax a little bit, right? You sort of experience this by being in the zone. Have you ever felt like in the zone at work or something like that? The distractions that are normally bothering you, they're just not as distracting anymore. It's the same concept. We're going to do this intentionally with our breath. And we use our breath because it's always with us, right? It's kind of it's a great tool in our tool belt because it's always there, hopefully. So that is the concept of breathing meditation. And then once we've relaxed a little bit, well, now we want to use our mind in a productive way. We want to look at the colors behind the water. We don't just want to like be like, okay, well, the water's clear, right? We want to do something with that. So today we're going to use our relaxed mind to investigate anxiety a little bit. Does that make sense? Hope so. We'll do a breathing meditation now. It'll be quick. Don't worry, you're not going to sit there for a very long time at all. And we're going to do this is like a counting meditation. And I like to do this one, this style of breathing meditation for anxiety classes, because it is a really good technique if your mind is extremely overactive, extremely busy. This particular meditation I find really good at relaxing like an overactive mind. Okay? All right. So if you have any questions, you can fire them away. After we do the meditation, I'll answer as many as I can before we get on to our topic for today. All right? So just sit in a comfy position. From an instructional standpoint, meditation is quite simple. You're just going to sit or lay down, or whatever you're doing is fine. You don't have to change anything. And you're just going to kind of follow along with what I'm saying. We're just going to focus on our breath. And then when we notice we're not focusing on our breath, we're going to bring our attention back to our breathing, right? We're just going to do that kind of over and over again and just follow along with what I'm saying. That's my job in this. Okay? All right. So close your eyes and relax. So when we first start meditating, start a meditation, it's good to check in with ourselves. How are you doing right now in this moment? Are you happy, sad, nervous, upset, neutral? Whatever it is, just notice it. We're practicing mindfulness, monitoring our mind moment to moment, checking in with ourselves. So just notice how you're feeling. And having checked in with ourselves, we can turn our full attention to our breathing. In and out of our nose, very gentle, very naturally. We do not need to take deep breaths or forceful exhalations. Just breathe very naturally, very normally. And follow your full breath in and your full breath out. You pay attention to some of the sensations of breathing. How the air feels cool on the tip of your nose as you breathe in, and warm as you breathe out. Just allow yourself to relax into your breath and breathe in and out very gently. Sometimes when our mind is extra busy, it can be helpful to give our mind a job, such as counting our breaths. So I'd like you, every time you breathe in and then out, to count. So 1, and in and out, 2. Count your breaths. and see how high up you can count before you lose track. If you find yourself losing track of your count, or your mind has drifted onto something else entirely, just gently guide it back to breathing and start your count over. This is called a counting meditation. In and out. 1. In and out. 2. Keep bringing your attention back to your breath whenever it drifts off or whenever you lose count. This process of focusing on our breath and then bringing our attention back to our breathing whenever it drifts off is meditation. You are meditating. You are training your mind to relax all on your own, simply by focusing on your breathing. How wonderful. So just spend the next couple of moments enjoying breathing in and out and counting your breaths to the best of your ability. Okay, great job. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes, relax, return to me. How'd that go? Pretty quick, right? It's not kind of too invasive into our schedule. We could probably work that in if we wanted to. So if that's your first time, you might have found that pretty difficult. Even if it's your 1,000,000th time, it might be difficult. I didn't miss a breath and got to 30. Wow. That's incredible. Crystal, you're crushing it. But even if you only got to 2, that's fine. Like, this is the most you've been able to do ever, right? We've never really done this before. We're not really good at focusing on one thing. We're actually kind of trained to multitask constantly, which is not really good for our peace of mind. And so over time, this is going to get easier, right? It's the same as learning anything else. Over time, it's going to get easier. The counting was helpful to keep me focused on breathing. Yeah, the counting is really good if your mind is super busy. This was advice that I got from a teacher for me personally, because my mind was like all over the place. And I really found the counting to be really helpful. So I'm glad you did too. But if you found this difficult, it should be because this is new. Anything that you're doing new is probably going to be challenging at first. But even if you're able to kind of relax just a little bit for like a second, all right? Well, you did that all on your own, right? You can expand upon that. You can grow that ability to relax, right? And you're doing this without any external, particular external circumstances, which is a really important takeaway of meditation. We have everything we need to kind of relax and meditate well right here in us, ready to go. So if you're new, this is where I would suggest starting. I would suggest introducing a very routine breathing meditation into your day. Once a day, it could be 30 seconds, anything's better than nothing. So find a time that would be appropriate for you to maybe do this. Actually last week we talked about how to build a routine, so you could check that out. But this is where I would start, breathing meditation. Okay. Any questions on meditation in general, breathing meditation, or anything we just did? If not, I'll move on to our topic of today. How to stop anxious thoughts. Sorry you're late. You don't have to apologize. Thanks for coming. So, how do we stop anxious thoughts? Is anybody interested in doing that? I feel like everybody, right? It's probably anxiety's got to be like one of the most common things. And it's so interesting because, like I was saying before, it feels not common, right? It feels like we have anxiety and nobody else does, but everyone does. So that in and of itself is kind of uplifting if we think about it. Like everyone's kind of in this together. So today we're going to focus on identifying the steps of how our mind goes from okay to anxious, right? And the reason that we're going to identify the steps is two parts. One, we don't really kind of think there are steps. We just think that we're okay, and then now there's anxiety, and there's nothing I can do. But it's not really true. There is like logical steps that are leading us up to the point that we feel anxious. And if we kind of get good at learning those from like an intellectual standpoint, then we can kind of identify them when they're happening, and we'll get good at recognizing our anxiety early, which is the most important thing. It's the first step towards beating our anxiety, to defeating it. We have to know that it's there and there early, right? And like you're probably like, yeah, I know my anxiety's there. That's the problem. But the problem is really that we notice that our anxiety is there when it's full blown anxiety and we're like in panic mode. It's sort of like I always use the example for anxiety that's like a forest fire. It was a really good example. Somebody, I don't know where, some teacher that I had used it. If there's a forest fire, if at first the fire is just very manageable, right? It's like one little flame, boop, boop, like that. We can just throw a bucket of water on it and we're good to go. But if we let it fester, then it becomes much harder to manage. It can be managed, but it becomes more difficult. And our anxiety is the same way. We're usually trying to combat it when it's a full-blown forest fire. So we need to start to get good at identifying it when it's a little flame, if that makes sense, right? And this idea of recognizing our anxiety early is mindfulness. Mindfulness, you might have heard that word, very buzzwordy these days. It's an active awareness of our mind. It's noticing what our mind is doing moment to moment. We kind of did that at the beginning of our meditation. At the beginning of our meditation, we checked in with ourselves. That's mindfulness. So if we can get good at checking in with ourselves throughout the day, well, we might start to get glimpses of our anxiety earlier, and then it'll be easier for us to resolve them, right? But the big problem we have right now is, as I said, we do not really recognize that there's like in between steps between okay and totally anxious, right? So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to kind of dissect that a little bit, and that's going to help us identify anxiety nice and early. So how do our anxious thoughts develop? Interesting question, right? We might not have ever thought about this. This is kind of the beauty of meditation. Like we relax our mind, and now we're going to kind of investigate things that we might not normally pay much attention to, right? So the way I teach this is there's 5 steps or stages. Today I'll call them stages. Doesn't really matter. There's 5 things. And stage 1 is contact, right? We come into contact with something. Right? Either physically or visually, or it's auditory. It can even be a memory. Like we come into contact with something that makes us a little unsettled, right? Anxiety starts with coming into contact with something, right? Makes sense. Pretty basic stuff. But interestingly enough, step 1 is completely unavoidable, and yet this is where we try to solve our anxiety. Right? If we're anxious about public speaking, we're like, okay, I'll just never speak in public, right? But then your, boss asks you to do a big presentation, and you got to do it. You can't say, well, you know what, I'm kind of doing this thing where I don't speak in public. It's probably not going to go over that well. So like, we're always trying to combat our anxiety by removing step one, the contact, but we can't avoid all of the things that bother us, right? If we spent our entire lives like trying to avoid all the things that bother us, we're going to be stressed out all the time. Oh, I'm glad you're finding this interesting. Welcome. So does that make sense? Like that kind of produces anxiety, trying to avoid the things that make us anxious. It's like this weird cycle. So that's step one. And we have to kind of just understand that we're going to come into contact things that might make us feel unsettled. It's going to happen, right? So we can't really avoid that, right? So from step one, we go to step two or stage two, whatever. I keep changing the word that I'm using. And this is what I'll call like negative association, right? So we come into contact with something, and now our mind is starting to label this thing as unpleasant, right? We're forming like a mental link with this thing in a negative way, right? So for me, I have a anxiety about itching. I've mentioned this before. I know that maybe is very weird to you. It's very not fun for me. And my mind has made this connection with itching equals bad, that like, even if I feel an itch, or even if I think about itching, I like get a little bit of anxiety, right? And so step two is forming this link of this thing I'm coming into contact with equals bad. There's three ways we interpret anything, right? Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, right? Neutral, big shrug. So anxiety is kind of it's in the unpleasant category, right? And the interesting thing about stage two, which is again negative association, is that the more familiar we become with like thinking of this thing as negative, the worse it is, right? So like I said, for me with like the itching idea, it's been so long that I've been anxious about this that it's like second nature for my mind to become anxious when I feel an itch, right? You might have the same thing with like social anxiety, or, there's like a million things. You could probably think of more than one that you have this negative kind of connection to. Does that make sense? A little stage two. So we have contact, right? We come into contact with something. We start to kind of label this as unpleasant. And then we get into stage three. And this is really where, this is the turning point, right? Stage three is exaggeration. This is kind of the key point of how our mind is transforming something into something that makes us anxious. This is like the rabbit hole, the what ifs, right? What if it never gets better, right? What if I say something dumb, right? What if I hurt myself? These are all the things that we're like get really anxious about, and we ruminate on, right? So we're kind of like building up the negativity of this thing. We're exaggerating what could probably happen, like worst case scenario, right? We're convincing ourselves that this thing that we have labeled as unpleasant is worse than it actually is, right? It's worse to us than it actually is. We're no longer really like looking at it in like an objective way or like a reasonable way. It's starting to transform into something extremely personal, right? And this kind of solidifies our negative association. It kind of solidifies the like stage two, right? And once we start to like do this kind of rumination or what ifs, this is the point at which we really want to like cut it out. Like, we want to notice that it's happening at this point at a minimum, really. Stage 2 and 3 are what is known as inappropriate attention. And this is where we ideally want to recognize our anxiety, because it's going to be like a small little fire that we can put out, as opposed to letting it proceed and becoming unmanageable. Does that make sense? The 3 steps we went over? Because these are really important, these 3. Beyond this, we're probably pretty familiar with what's coming up. But these 3 are really important. So let me know if you have any questions. So after stage 3, which is exaggeration, right? So we come into contact with something, we start to identify it as something negative, unpleasant, we don't really like it. Then we start to exaggerate the bad qualities of it. We start to exaggerate what will happen from this. This is in the future, right? We're basically making up stories about what's going to happen, and they're not good stories. So then we get into the next step of developing anxiety, which is wishing away. So stage 4 is wishing away. This is where we develop like aversion or anger. Anxiety is anger. Not really something that we really think about, but anger is really like, thinking that not being okay with what's going on. Things should be different than they are. And that's really our anxiety. We're like, this shouldn't be happening, right? So we start to wish this away. I wish this would go away. This is like panic mode for us, right? We start to feel helpless. And the only recourse we have is to like just hope it goes away, right? And really what this stage is reinforcing is a lack of acceptance, right? We are not accepting that our mind is currently anxious. We're like, it shouldn't be this way. This shouldn't be happening to me, right? So this step kind of is really reinforcing our feeling of helplessness. And once we start to feel helpless, that's now the fire of anxiety is starting to grow. And it's becoming harder to manage it because we inherently feel like we do not have the power to manage this, right? We start to feel helpless. And then wishing away turns into stage 5, which is like anxiety. It's anxiety. Okay. I'm super anxious about this thing. And, we like feel incapable of resolving it or lessening it or helping ourselves really doing this. And unfortunately for us, our current anxiety detection radar goes off in stage 4 and 5 respectively. And we really need to be earlier. We need to try to get into like the stage 2, stage 3, the negative association, or really the exaggeration is where we want to aim for, because that's the turning point. That's the most important step. Does this make sense? These 5 things? I'm going to go through an example of actual like social anxiety to like reinforce a real world example of these. So it's not just like a bunch of intellectual, interesting words that you're hearing. But before I do that, does this make sense? Do you find this interesting? Like, we don't really think about this, right? We just think, okay, I'm anxious now. I was okay. Now I'm not okay. But there's actually steps to get there that our mind is going through. Anyway, I always found this really interesting. Sometimes like having an intellectual understanding of what's going on can even like lessen the potency of it. Anyway, I find that to be the case sometimes. Yes, all makes sense. All right, good. Okay, so I'm going to do an example of the steps, and I'm going to use like a social anxiety situation, like a job interview. Or you could, I guess you could, this is the same as like meeting somebody or dating. It's kind of like job interview. And the reason I'm doing this is because social anxiety is pretty common. But like if you have something in particular that you're anxious about and you want me to do this example, you would let me know. I'm happy to go through that as well. They're all pretty much the same. All right. So if let's say we have a job interview, right? So stage 1, contact. What's happening? We wake up and we remember that we have a job interview. We can't avoid that. We have a job interview, right? I think we can pretend that we don't have a job interview. I think we could maybe never try to get a job. Eventually we're going to have to get a job, right? So like we can't avoid contact, right? So we can't try to resolve the anxiety of a job interview by not ever going on interviews. Right? That's usually what we do, and that just really isn't the way to approach it. So we wake up, we remember we have a job interview, and so we're starting to get a little nervous about it, right? So now we're entering into like stage 2. We're having a negative association with the job interview. We'll probably say things like, I didn't get the last job I interviewed for. I have to be perfect. This is going to be really stressful, right? All these things we're making negative links. The links only exist in our mind. It's not real. The job interview we have today is a blank slate. But in our mind, we're making negative associations with it. We're kind of making assumptions about it in a negative way. We're linking negative thinking to the job interview, right? So that's kind of the stage 2 of our anxiety. And then we get into exaggeration. These are the what ifs, like we said, right? So for this, let's see, like what if I hit traffic, right? Going to my interview. And, what if I hit traffic? Then we start to like let that ruminate in our mind. And then we start to think, I'm always late, right? What if I say something dumb? Ruminates. I always say dumb things. What if they ask me something I don't know? Ruminate. I'm not prepared. What if they think I'm like underdressed, right? I look terrible. What if I don't get the job? I'm a failure. Like, so what we're doing is we are ruminating on this kind of like negative link, and we're exaggerating what we think is like going to be the reality of this job interview. I mean, maybe we do hit traffic, but the reality is we haven't hit traffic yet. And just because we hit traffic doesn't mean that we're like inherently always late. We start to like make these weird links with anxiety. We start to look at these things as permanent fixtures of ourselves. So that's kind of like where I think we would go if we're having like a job interview with the exaggeration. And the interesting thing, and why this section is so important, is because none of these have happened yet, right? We are kind of voluntarily taking on negative thinking of something that hasn't happened yet. We're crafting stories. We're bringing this into reality, really. We're almost kind of willing it into reality by like planting these seeds in our mind. And these seeds they're exaggerations. They are exaggerations of a future outcome. Anxiety, right? So then stage 4, we start to wish it away, right? So now we're kind of really anxious about our job interview. And we start to say things like, I wish this was over already, or I don't even want to go, or why can't I find a job like everybody else? Everybody else doesn't have to have this problem, right? So this is a feeling of helplessness. Like this is that we're building upon the exaggerations, and we are starting to feel that this is out of our control, all right? And then we get into anxiety, right? I can't do this. I can't cope with these feelings, right? We've built so much on this idea of like a helplessness through like wishing this away that we now feel incapable of really doing anything about it. It becomes very difficult to work within the confines of anxiety when it's full blown. It's hard. It's hard to calm ourselves and to reason with ourselves when we're like that, which is why we have to get better at detecting it early. Was that helpful? The like real world example? I know I'm going a little long, so like maybe I don't have time to do like one that's particular to you. But if you do suffer from anxiety and you would like to work with me to kind of go through the steps of how you get from okay to your particular thing that's making you anxious, I'm happy to do that. You can just email me, Keith at Meditation Breaks, and we can like work that out. But hopefully that kind of like reinforces what we were talking about. I think the job interview is like pretty common. Probably all felt that anxiety once in a while. I have. Okay, so it's like, all right, cool. This is all fun and intellectual and great, and this is interesting. But like, what do I do? Right? I've recognized that I'm anxious. What do I do? And the main thing we're going to do is create space. That's kind of how we start to manage anxiety. Really, our early detection will set us up to kind of counterattack anxiety. So we're going to recognize, step one is we're going to recognize the stage we're in. Rob, question. Let's say you're motivated to do something to improve your life. Then time passes, and then you're anxious about not having done the thing you were motivated to do. It's something like that. Well, so really what's happening at that point, right, is you have made kind of like this negative association, like I didn't do this, right? Right. This, I kind of procrastinated or whatever, right? And then we start to exaggerate upon that, right? Like, I always put things off. I am incapable of seeing things through. Does that sound familiar? Right? So like this is the what ifs, right? So we're starting to ingrain these self-concepts into our mind. And then we start to just kind of wish it away. Like, you know what? I wish I never even got started doing this. You know, I'm not going to be able to do this. I don't even want to do it anymore. Right? We start to we're like developing anxiety about doing this thing. We start to feel like we can't do it. So the steps are really the same. We're having anxiety about not completing a task, right? The task is in the future. It's a future outcome. We're making exaggerations on a future outcome, right? Our feeling kind of incapable about doing this thing is really all in our mind. It's all built up in ourself. It's not really a reality. It's not reality. In reality, we can do this thing. We could have done it before. We can do it now. Hopefully that was helpful a little bit. So when we recognize what stage we're in, right? And we're going to have to accept what stage you're in, okay? You might recognize that you're in stage 5, anxiety, full blown, okay? No problem, Rob, anytime. And that's okay. The first thing we got to get good at is recognizing what stage we're in and accepting it. It's okay, okay? We don't have to get down ourselves. Oh, I should have detected this earlier. No, like just accept where you are, right? And then we're going to create space. And what I mean by space is mental space, but we can kind of use the idea of physical space to understand what mental space is. Things that, in brief, because we're going to meditate on this, so I'll get into it in detail, but things that are further away from us seem less scary and less problematic, right? That's why things in that's happening next week. I'm not worried about that. And then it's like the day, and you're like, oh my God, I didn't do it. Right? Further away, it's okay. Close, not okay. Same thing with like, we're going to do a meditation on this actually, but like a storm, let's see a storm off in the distance. It's like, man, that's kind of cool. Storm over us, not cool. So the idea of physical space translates into mental space. So we want to use breathing meditation to kind of distance ourselves from the anxiety, the thoughts of anxiety. So we can kind of look at them in a more objective way, less exaggerated way. This is a good way of like combating with the stage 3 sort of stuff. Does that make sense? One other tip before we do this is you should practice doing these breathing meditations when you're not totally anxious right now. That isn't to say that they won't help when you are. They certainly will, but when you're learning, it can be tough to kind of get into the groove of meditation when you're in panic mode. I speak from personal experience with that. So try to do it when you're feeling okay too. All right, let's do it. We're going to do, this is called contemplation. This is really like the second part of what meditation is, the investigation portion. So we're going to do a little breathing meditation to relax ourselves like we did last time, nice and short. And then I'm going to lead a contemplation on the idea of creating space. And all you have to do for that is just pay attention to what I'm saying and kind of let it sink in, right? So we're going to kind of like open our mind a little bit by relaxing it, right? and then just kind of listen to the things that I'm talking about, follow along, and see if anything kind of rings true with you. All right? If you have any questions about this, like I said, fire it away. I'll get to it after the meditation, but let's get going because I know it's getting late for some people. All right, so just sit comfortably again in your chair, or if you're laying down, that's fine, and close your eyes. Let's check in with ourselves again. How are you feeling now? Don't worry about how you were feeling before. How are you feeling now? We're practicing mindfulness. We're training ourselves to notice how we're feeling. This will help us notice if we're feeling anxious early. So just take note of how you're feeling right now in this moment. Having checked in with ourselves, we can turn our attention to our breathing. We can go back to counting our breaths. In and out. 1. In and out. 2. See how high you can count before you lose track. And if you lose track, just start over at 1. Very gently, very natural breathing. Just check in and see, where is your mind right now? If it's drifted off, thinking about something else, something that happened earlier, or something you have to do later, just put that aside for now and gently guide your attention back to your breathing, back to counting your breaths, back to enjoying sitting here, enjoying breathing, enjoying allowing yourself to relax. Keep bringing your attention back to your breath as many times as you need to. You are meditating. You are a meditator. You're training your mind to be peaceful, to relax, to de-stress. You're doing it all on your own, without needing anything other than your breath. How wonderful. How wonderful that you are able to calm yourself, even just a little bit, all on your own. Just keep breathing in and out. Allow yourself to relax deeper and deeper into your breathing. After breathing in this way, we might find ourselves feeling a little more relaxed, even just a bit. a little more peaceful, a little more expansive. This is your natural mind state shining through. Your mind is normally, naturally, very calm, very peaceful. And by removing the bombardment of thoughts that are bouncing around daily, we can see that. We can start to realize that at our core, we are naturally peaceful and calm. And we can use this calm mind as a learning tool, a way to investigate something. Today, we're going to be investigating the importance of creating space between us and the things that make us anxious. So just follow along with what I'm saying. I'd like you to imagine that you are sitting in a gorgeous open field. A golden wheat field with rolling hills. You can see for miles. It's a beautiful blue sky day. Just imagine. And off, way off in the distance, miles and miles and miles and miles away, you can see a storm starting. Dark clouds, flashes of lightning. You sitting in this beautiful wheat field, observing the storm from afar. You might say things like, "Wow, how cool. Did you see that? I just saw a lightning strike." We are looking at something that is actually quite worrisome, with fascination instead of fear, because we feel safe. It is far away from us. But the longer we sit there, the storm starts to get closer. We start to hear thunder. The high grass, the high wheat fields, they start to blow in the breeze of the storm. And as the storm gets closer, we stop looking at it in a fascinating way. It becomes less cool and more fearful because it is closer to us. And eventually, the storm might be right over our heads and we're panicking. We're out in a field and there's a storm right over us. This is an example of how physical space plays a part in how we look at things. How we view things in terms of, are they troublesome, unpleasant, pleasant, cool, fascinating, fearful. The same is true for mental space. And this is the technique we need to employ for combating our anxiety. When we have anxiety, the storm is over our head. And so we panic. We need to create some space between us and the storm, some space between us and our anxiety, so we can look at our anxiety with fascination instead of fear. So we can say, "Wow, isn't that interesting?" instead of, "Oh no, not again." So just make a little promise to yourself that you're going to start consciously recognizing when you are having anxiety, accepting that it's happening, and then using the breathing meditation techniques that we've done here today to create some space. We're not striving for perfection. We're just getting started. Just try to put these things into practice. Just make a promise to yourself to put these things into practice to help understand where our anxious thoughts come from and to start to feel empowered that we can counteract them. Just sit with that for a little while longer. You can do it. Okay. When you're ready, you can relax. Return from the flowing wheat fields back to your computer or phone or wherever. I don't know. Maybe you're in a wheat field watching this. That'd be nice. Does that idea of space make sense? That actually happened to me. I use that example because it happened to me and my wife in Montana. We're looking at a storm really far away. We're like, "Wow, it's awesome!" And then it came up on us. We're like, "Not awesome. We got to go." So, how do you create space to allow fascination with a job interview? It's hard when it's mental space instead of physical space. Yeah. So we are not really familiar with the concept of mental space. This is new to us, right? That's why I like using this example, because understanding how physical space plays a part in managing our anxiety, mental space does that too. And look, creating physical space between us and our anxiety thing does help, right? But it's really the mental space that we have to get good at for lasting improvement. And the way that we create mental space, let's say with a job interview, is when we notice that we are getting anxious. Like, let's say we're going to go into the job interview. We just get to the building and we're like, oh, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. Take a moment and focus single pointedly on your breathing, right? If you like the counting, do the counting. We're going to do the breathing meditation. And what's going to happen is there's not going to be room in our mind for those thoughts. That's the beauty of breathing meditation. Through concentration, interestingly enough, it relaxes us. We think of concentration as not relaxing, but it actually is. We're going to focus so much on breathing just for a little while that our worries about the exaggerations about what's going to happen in this job interview are going to start to melt away. And we're going to start to find ourselves looking at the job interview in a more objective way, less subjective. And look, it's not going to be perfect. Like I said, the goal here is not to strive for perfection, but just little wins, little baby steps. We'll get to being able to conquer this fully. But right now, we just want to, even if we can bring our anxiety threshold down slightly, we're going to be able to go into that job interview with a way better mindset, right? Less panic, more fascination, right? More interested in this, and less like, please let this be over. Please let me do okay, right? Wishing away. So that breathing, really the answer to your question, Crystal, is through breathing meditation. But it's easier to do the breathing meditation and see the benefits of it if we detect our anxiety early. So that's why the two of them kind of work hand in hand. So we want to try to check in with ourselves throughout the day. Set an alarm on your phone is even a good method to do, to check in with yourself, see how you're doing. Maybe you've been feeling a little anxious and you caught it early, and then you can kind of do this to start to practice settling down a little bit. But like I said, if you're super, super anxious going into a job interview and you're not used to meditating, you're not used to doing breathing meditation, this is going to be a challenging moment for you to introduce this into your life, isn't it? So that's why we have to practice when we're feeling okay. That way, when we're not feeling okay, we have our experience to fall back on. Hopefully that was a helpful answer of some kind. Any other questions on meditation in general? Anxiety, the steps of how we go from okay to anxious. Thank you. And thank you for a really wonderful question and for always being here and being such a great participant. Any other questions on anything we talked about? If you think of something later, you can always comment on this video. I check all the time, or you can email me. If it's personal, you can email me personally, keith@meditationbreaks.com. I'm happy to work with you as long as necessary to kind of figure out what you're going through and how this can help you. And if you found this interesting, thought-provoking, fascinating, kind of cool, any of those, I'd encourage you to come back. We do these every Wednesday. It's a new topic every week. There's a lot we can gain. There's a lot of insight we can gain by just kind of thinking about how our mind works. That's really what meditation's all about. So come back, bring a friend. That'd be cool for me to have some more people introduced to me and to meditation and to the channel. And if you feel like subscribing to the YouTube channel, that's also really helpful to me. It's also helpful to you. You get notified when I'm going live. I usually go live like 10 minutes before, like with a countdown. So people be like, oh, okay, let me finish up what I'm doing and then I can get ready for this. So that's a benefit of subscribing to the YouTube channel. In case you forget, we're all very busy, right? And then if you're totally into this, you're totally into meditation, you want to take this to the next step, I do private instruction, I do corporate events, and those are really good. We can kind of fine tune the lessons to things you're actually going through. Anxiety is a really good example, right? Not everyone experiences social anxiety in the same capacity that person A might versus person B. You might have a totally different type of thing you're anxious about. Maybe you're anxious about itching like me, and we can have a wonderful conversation about it. Probably not. But that's a benefit of like personal one-on-one meditation, which I do offer. So if that's interesting to you, you can check that out on my website, meditationbreaks.com, or just email me and we can figure something out. And as always, thank you. Thank you for being here. I couldn't do this without you guys. These Wednesday classes exist because of you. So thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be here and to learn about meditation and to relax with me and to learn with me. So I really appreciate your time. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll see you next week.